I thought I was the careful one. That's what my daughter always said growing up. Dad, you're the one who reads every contract before you sign it. You're the one who checks the expiration date on everything in the fridge. She used to tease me about it when she was a teenager, called me paranoid. I took it as a compliment. So when my son-in-law offered to set up a smart home security system for me last spring, I thought, this is fine. This is good, actually. I'm 67 years old, living alone in this house since my wife passed and my daughter worries. I understand that. I worried about my own mother when she got older. It's what families do. He drove up on a Saturday morning, which I remember because my neighbor Bud was out washing his truck, and the two of them waved at each other across the yard the way men do when they don't actually know each other well enough to talk. My son-in-law came in with 2 cardboard boxes, the kind of setup that looks professional. Cameras, a central hub, motion sensors for the front door and the back porch. He spent about 4 hours installing everything, and I sat at the kitchen table watching him work, asking questions, writing things down in a small notepad the way I always do. He walked me through the app, showed me how to pull up the camera feeds on my phone, how to check the motion alerts. He said the system would send me a notification anytime something moved near the front door after 10 at night. I told him that sounded like it would wake me up every time a raccoon crossed the yard, and he laughed. He had a good laugh, my son-in-law. Easy smile. The kind of man who makes you feel like things are simpler than they are. Before he left, he set himself up as an additional user, said it was standard. That way, if I ever had trouble accessing the system, he could help me troubleshoot remotely. That seemed reasonable to me. I didn't think twice about it. That was April. By May, I'd gotten used to the system, checked it in the mornings, got the alerts on my phone. A couple times I caught the mailman arriving earlier than I expected, and I liked that. Felt like having an extra set of eyes. My daughter called me one evening and mentioned that she could see the camera was working, that she'd checked in on the house while I was at my doctor's appointment. I thought that was a little odd. I didn't know she had access, but I figured my son-in-law had set her up too, as a courtesy. I let it go. Now, I need to tell you about my friend Erwin. Erwin and I served together years ago. He's the kind of man you want next to you in a situation that's going sideways because he doesn't panic. He thinks. He's been in telecommunications for most of his adult life, and even after he retired, he kept tinkering. He's got a workshop in his basement full of equipment that his wife says looks like NASA threw up in there. He knows systems. He knows networks. He knows things about how devices talk to each other that most people don't think about until something goes wrong. He came over on a Thursday afternoon in late May. I was grilling in the backyard, and we sat out there talking for a while before we came inside. He noticed the camera above my front door when we walked in. He didn't say anything right then. We ate, talked about his grandson, watched part of a baseball game. He was getting ready to leave when he stopped in the hallway and looked at the small hub device mounted on the wall, the central piece of the whole system. He looked at it the way a mechanic looks at an engine he doesn't quite trust. He said, "You mind if I take a look at this?" I said, "Help yourself." He pulled out his phone and spent maybe 15 minutes looking at the system from the network side of things. I didn't entirely follow what he was doing. At some point, he asked me to pull up the app on my own phone, and I did. He said, "How many user accounts are set up on this system?" I looked at the app. I said, "Me and my son-in-law, and maybe my daughter." He said, "There are 4 accounts with full administrative access." I looked at him. I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It means 4 people can view all of your cameras in real time. All of them can pull recorded footage, and at least one of those accounts has also enabled the audio monitoring feature on the indoor unit." I set my phone down on the counter. Erwin said quietly, "Frank, someone has been listening inside your home. I want you to understand something about that moment. It wasn't loud. There was no dramatic music, no sudden outburst. I just stood in my own kitchen in the house where I raised my daughter, and I felt something shift inside my chest. The way the ground feels different under your feet right after an earthquake. Everything looks the same. But you know it isn't. I asked Erwin who the 4th account was. He said he couldn't tell me the name on the account without digging deeper, but that the account had been active. Recently active. I said, "How recently?" He said, "Yesterday." I sat down. Here's what I didn't do. I didn't call my daughter. I didn't call my son-in-law. I didn't tear the cameras off the walls even though part of me wanted to. I just sat in that kitchen chair and thought, I'm 67 years old, and I've learned that the first move you make when you find out something like this is almost never the right one. Anger is fast, clarity is slow, and I needed to be clear. Erwin sat down across from me. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said. "I want to know what they're looking for." He said, "That's the right question. We didn't touch the system. We didn't change any settings. We left everything exactly as it was." Erwin wrote down some notes, technical notes about the accounts, the access history, what he'd seen, and we agreed that I would call an attorney before I did anything else. Erwin's son-in-law was a retired detective, and Erwin said he'd ask him to make a few calls. I drove home that night. I sat in my own house, which felt strange to call home right then, and I went through the last several months in my head. My daughter asking about my doctor's appointments with a kind of specific detail that went beyond what I told her. A conversation I'd had on the phone with my financial advisor, and how, 3 days later, my son-in-law had offhandedly mentioned the name of the firm. Small things that had slipped past me because I trusted them, because I had no reason not to. Until I did. The next few weeks were the strangest of my life. I was living inside my own house like a guest who couldn't let on that he knew the staff had been reading his mail. I was careful about what I said out loud, had phone calls outside in the backyard. I started keeping my financial documents at Erwin's place. I told my daughter I was doing well, sleeping fine, feeling good, and she had no reason to doubt me because she'd been able to hear for herself that nothing in the house sounded different. I went to see an estate attorney first, because that was the quiet way to start. I sat in her office and told her what Erwin had found, and she didn't look surprised, which told me she'd seen something like this before. She said the first thing I needed to understand was whether there was a legal dispute already in motion, meaning was someone preparing to challenge my mental competency? Was there any paperwork being assembled somewhere that I didn't know about? The question hit me harder than I expected. Because here's the thing I hadn't said out loud yet. Not even to Erwin. About 6 months before the cameras went up, my son-in-law had started asking me about the house. Not directly. Not in any way I could have called out in the moment. It was always framed as care. "Dad, have you thought about what happens to the property down the line?" It's a lot of house for one person. My buddy knows a real estate attorney if you ever want to think about your options. I live in a 4-bedroom house in the same neighborhood I've lived in for 31 years. The value has gone up considerably. My wife and I planned for retirement carefully. There is money here, not a fortune, but enough. And I have a will. My daughter knows about the will. She also knows it doesn't leave everything to her and her husband. Some of it goes to my wife's sister, who is older and lives on a fixed income. Some goes to a church my wife loved. My son-in-law had once, years ago, referred to this arrangement as not really practical. I'd let it go. I was done letting things go. Erwin's contact, the retired detective, made a few calls. What came back was not what I expected, and also exactly what I should have expected. There had been conversations between my son-in-law and a family attorney he'd consulted on his own about the process of establishing conservatorship, legal guardianship over an elderly parent who might be showing signs of cognitive decline. I had never shown any signs of cognitive decline. I drive myself to my appointments. I manage my own finances. I read, I cook, I help Erwin in his workshop. But it doesn't matter what's true. What matters is what can be documented. And if someone installs a listening device in your home and waits long enough, eventually they can find moments, a forgotten word, a misplaced item, an offhand comment taken out of context, that can be made to look like something they aren't. That's what the cameras were for. I sat with this for 3 days before I told anyone else. Erwin knew. The attorney knew. And on the 4th day, I called my daughter. That was the hardest phone call I have ever made. Not because I was angry. I was past angry by then. I was something quieter and more tired than anger. I called her because she is my daughter, and I wanted to believe. I still want to believe that she didn't fully understand what her husband was doing, that she'd been sold the story about me that wasn't true, a slow drip of small concerns that had built into something she felt justified in responding to. I don't know if that's true. Maybe I'll never know. She answered on the 2nd ring, the way she always does when she sees it's me. I said, "I need you to come over. Just you." She came that evening. She sat in the same chair her mother used to sit in, and I told her what Erwin had found. I didn't raise my voice. I showed her the notes. I showed her the attorney's letter, and I watched her face go through things I don't have words for. She said, "I didn't know about the audio." I said, "What did you know about?" She was quiet for a long time. She said, "He told me you'd been forgetting things, that he was worried. He said the cameras were so we'd have peace of mind." I said, "Peace of mind for who?" She didn't answer. The detective who came to the house a few weeks later, Irwin's contact, now acting in an official capacity at the request of my attorney, was thorough and quiet and professional. He sat at my kitchen table and went through the documentation that had been assembled, the unauthorized audio access, the account activity, the consultation my son-in-law had sought about conservatorship without my knowledge. There is a process for all of this, and it had been set in motion. My attorney had also filed a complaint with the state's Adult Protective Services regarding potential financial exploitation of an elderly adult, which is what the law calls it when someone positions themselves to take over the life and assets of a person over 65 without that person's informed consent. It sounds formal when I put it that way, clinical, but what it felt like in that kitchen, watching a detective sit at my table and take notes, it felt like my life had been treated as a problem to be solved, a thing to be managed, and the people doing it were the people I had trusted most. I'm not going to tell you that everything is resolved now, the way a movie wraps up in the last 5 minutes. My daughter and I are still talking, carefully. We have more conversations ahead of us than I can count, and not all of them will be comfortable. My son-in-law is no longer welcome in my house. That's not a dramatic thing I decided in a moment of rage. It's a quiet thing I decided after thinking about what trust means and what it looks like when it's gone. The cameras came down the same day the detective left. Irwin helped me take them off the walls. It took about 40 minutes. He rolled up all the wiring and put it in the box the system came in, and I put that box in the garage. I haven't decided what to do with it yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe it'll just sit there. The house is quieter now, not a bad quiet. Just the regular kind. The kind where the heat clicks on in the morning and the refrigerator hums, and you can hear rain on the roof when it comes. I made coffee last Sunday and sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper and felt, for the first time in months, like the house was mine again. But I want to leave you with this. There's a difference between someone who pays attention to you because they love you and someone who monitors you because they're building something. Love pays attention to what you need. It notices when you're tired, when you're sad, when your laugh comes a little slower than it used to. It checks in because it wants to. It doesn't need documentation. It doesn't need administrator access. What was set up in this house wasn't love. It was surveillance. And the cruelest part of it is that it came wrapped in concern, installed by someone I called family, on a day meant to celebrate exactly the kind of bond they were quietly working to undermine. I was the careful one. I still am. The difference now is that I know what I'm being careful about. And if you're watching this and something in your gut has been quietly trying to get your attention, about a device someone set up for you, about a conversation that felt a little too well informed, about a question that got asked at exactly the wrong moment, don't talk yourself out of it. That feeling is not paranoia. That feeling is your experience trying to protect you. Trust it.